Hey guys, and welcome to my shop. So a little while back, I reviewed an open frame laser cutter and engraver. And it's the first time I ever used one of those machines. And honestly, I was pretty blown away with all the cool things that you can do with it. I understand why they're so popular now. The thing is, after I shot that video and used it more and more here in the shop, I realized how impractical it is to actually have an open frame laser cutter engraver. Yeah, it's not bad to get started with, but you pretty quickly realize that you get a lot of smoke even just cutting wood, and there's a lot of other cool materials that you'd like to cut that you really can't unless you're like doing it outside, which is impractical for other reasons. So I've wanted to build an enclosure for that machine for a while, and I went and I picked up this huge electrical enclosure box and some acrylic sheet. This is orange in color to cut like a window in here, and I had planned on basically making a enclosure for that machine out of this stuff. And almost right after this stuff arrived, I got an email from Creality asking if I would like to review their brand new flagship pro level fully enclosed laser. Okay, so in case it's not obvious enough, this is going to be a sponsored video. Creality is sending me this machine completely free of charge in exchange for making this video. And I'll mark this video as such here on YouTube that it is sponsored content. Now, when I agreed to review it, I said I would only do so if I was able to speak my mind on this machine, share my actual thoughts and opinions on it. And if you want to take that with a grain of salt, since it's sponsored, I mean, feel free, but if you've seen any videos here on my channel before, I tend to speak very straightforward about how I feel about something, whether I've paid for it or someone has sent it to me. So, all right, let's dig into it. So after getting over the initial excitement of having just been offered a brand new flagship, fully enclosed, top of the line laser cutter engraver, I did the next logical thing that probably you guys would do as well. I went up to their website and I took a look at the specs. And I was initially a little bit disappointed, if I'll be honest, because the machine has no display and no network connectivity, which were two of my favorite features from the budget open frame laser cutter engraver that I took a look at in the past. And I almost wrote them back and said, you know what, don't bother sending it, because while I have no problem being very honest and forthcoming in these reviews, even if I've gotten something for free, it seems kind of dishonest to accept something for free that I know I'm not going to be able to speak positively about at all because I already know I don't like it. So I kept looking at that page that had the specs on it, and I'm glad I did, because it turns out I really just didn't understand the machine at all. It's not meant to be used in the same way that the other machine that I had used is. It's not meant to walk up and actually use the machine from the interface on the machine itself. It's really tightly integrated with lightburn. It's meant to be used right from lightburn. And let me tell you guys, they did a heck of a job with that integration. But first, let's get the machine unboxed and take a look at it. So Creality did a great job boxing and packaging up this machine. I mean, it is a heavy machine, and there are individual compartments in here for every single component. And the foam around the sides is really thick. And ironically, this foam in here, the different layers of foam were probably cut with a laser. And you could cut foam like this with this laser, but it's another great example of why you would want an enclosed machine so you're not breathing those fumes. All right, so I've gone ahead and assembled this machine, and it's a very simple process. The lower part of the machine, the actual laser cutter engraver itself, comes already assembled. You're really just assembling the top portion of the machine, the enclosure part. And I'm incredibly detail oriented and really take my time and read every step twice, and it still only took me about maybe 30 minutes to get this put together. So let me get this switched on and opened up. So as you heard there, when you first turn the machine on, the air assist automatically runs for about 30 seconds and then auto powers off, and it will power back on automatically when we actually start a cutting or engraving operation. And it connects to the side of the machine with two connections. One is the power and sensor connection, and the other is the air hose coming into the side of the machine. There's also a digital control wheel here to control the amount of airflow through the hose. I initially thought this might just be pinching like another hose inside the machine here, but it is digitally controlled, so you can control it with this knob, or you can actually also control it with a setting through G-code as well. I've been using this machine for about 2 weeks. I really wanted to sort of get comfortable with the machine and make sure that I understood it fully. Basically just get some seat time before I talk to you guys about it, because the last review I did, I didn't really realize until I had more time with the machine how much of a pain it was not actually having an enclosure. Now I've got this machine connected to fume extraction down here in my basement. It does come standard with a fan actually that is inside the machine that will push air out of this. So if you run it to a window, it'll push any smoke that's generated in the machine out. I've removed that fan from my install here. That's why you don't see it in this video, because I have a ducted fan on the other end of this exhaust. And I have a video for installing the fume extraction system down here in my basement. I'll link that in the description of this video if you want to check that out. So let's first talk about the enclosure on this machine, because that is really the killer feature, and not just because it has one, but also because of how they designed it. This is like a roll top sliding lid, so you have zero clearance required on the top. We could basically have this thing on a deep shelf or right up against a wall, and in fact this is right up against the wall here in my basement. It's just shy of actually touching the concrete foundation wall back there. Because the way this opens and closes, you don't need any clearance around the machine. There's no huge lid to open up. There's nothing to swing to the side, or there's no cover to take off and then have to put back on. This is it. It's just a nice sliding cover that doesn't take up any more space than the lid or the overall cover actually takes up. And that is really nice. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the overall engineering and general fit and finish inside this machine. It's extremely well thought out, from the cable management to just how everything functions inside this machine. So, for example, even these Velcro straps here, I didn't add these. These are standard. They're steel clips that hold the power signal and air hose for the air assist right down here onto the crossbar. You can see the right angle fitting they come into here at the end of the crossbar. And you can see as I move this guy back and forth, it works almost kind of like a cable arm there along the side. And those are still clipped into the side as well. So there's nothing to try and figure out, you know, how to route when you're working at the extreme ends of the gantry. All that has been figured out and executed in this machine, you know, before you even get it. The only thing I had to do inside the machine was install the actual laser head on here, which is down to, I think, like 3 screws, and just plugging stuff in up here at the top. Another nice feature on this machine, and in fact what's providing the nice lighting here in our video, is this LED light bar that is integrated right into the back of this panel on the machine. It gives you really nice lighting inside the laser to set up and position your parts. And even with the lid closed, you still have really good visibility into the machine. Now, Creality's gone with a rather unique way of handling waste on this machine. Now, what I mean by waste is, if we're engraving something, we don't have any waste, right? I mean, we put a part in, we engrave on it, we take the part out. But if we're cutting stuff, all the little offcuts, all the little pieces, like if we cut a little hole, that's going to drop somewhere, right? Now, on a lot of laser cutters, you just have a flat bottom. Some of them have a honeycomb, or you can add a honeycomb to them. This has these slats, and these slats are actually movable, and they're a pretty neat design. I'll pull one out so you can get a better look at it. It's probably easiest to see if we just look at the profile of the end of it. It's an aluminum extrusion, it's hollow in the center, and it comes to a point at the top. And these are adjustable. You see all the little slots here on the side. We can position these any way we want. I've got them spaced, I've got them double spaced here, I guess you could say. But you can put them right next to each other. Here, I'll do that with this one here. There, I put that one back intentionally right next to this other one here, leaving a gap. So if you want to set yourself up for a gap, like if you have maybe a part that has feet on it or something like that, or you have really small parts, you can position these right next to each other as well. In fact, you can really configure them any way you want. And in addition to that, you can actually set them flat on top of here too. There we go. I pulled those two out, set them down flat, and we could do the same thing with the rest. I could put all these out and then set them down flat on that rail, so we just have a nice flat surface in here as well. The other part of the waste management system on this machine is this giant drawer. The entire bottom of the unit is a huge drawer that pulls all the way out. It's on rolling wheels, so it goes in and out real easily. And this is where everything you cut that drops off is going to end up. Now you can pull the whole thing all the way out and walk it over to the garbage can and just dump it out. I generally pull it all the way out, bring my shop vac over, and just vacuum everything off the bottom. Way easier than having to take out all the slats, or if you've got a honeycomb or whatever else in here that you're cutting on, you don't have to take that out through this hole in the enclosure. You just pull that drawer out and just get rid of your waste that way. So another nice feature of this enclosure is, in addition to just keeping those fumes inside the unit and getting sucked up out of the fume extraction instead of going up into our nose, is safety for our eyeballs. This material that this is constructed from safely filters any of the light that's emitted back from that laser, so we don't need to wear safety glasses when we're using this machine. And when I say safety glasses, I mean specifically laser safety glasses that filter out the dangerous wavelengths of light. This enclosure does that regardless of what angle you're viewing from. And they actually took it a step further. This machine is FDA compliant, so if you want to use this in a business, you're covered. Now, that might not mean anything to you or me who's just, has this down in our basement and we're the only ones using it. But if you're running a business and particularly if you're going to have someone else operate the unit that you're paying, that's important. You're going to want that compliancy. And that's one of the reasons I think the Creality chased that on this machine, is to make sure that, folks that are doing production work can pick up X number of these to get that production work done. Now, part of that safety certification is sensors that are built into the machine to make sure that we stay safe. You notice there's two lights on here that are blue presently. Watch what happens when I open this. They go red right away. Now, this machine knows when this lid is open and when it's closed. So should I accidentally forget to close this before I start a job, or even worse, if I open this while a job is running, I can't accidentally blind myself from that emitted light coming back up and bouncing back up off the work into my eyeballs, because the moment I open this up, that machine's going to turn off. It's really quick. You see how quickly, the moment that I open this guy, those lights immediately turn red. Two other nice safety features right up here on the front of the machine. There is a key lock on the front, and this key is actually removable, so if I was to turn this guy off and take the key out, no one can operate this machine until that key is reinserted and turned to on. It's also a nice big metal stop button, so should you make a mistake in your settings and there's something burning or there's otherwise an issue in the machine that is a problem, you don't need to run back to your PC that you started the job from. You can just hit this stop button. That immediately kills all the power to the machine. So I mentioned this machine comes standard with air assist, but what even is air assist and why would you want that? Well, air assist really simply is just compressed air. That's what this is. This is a small air compressor, and that air is coming through our hose here all the way through the machine and is plumbed right into the laser head of the machine. And in fact, that is plumbed then down through the laser head and through a small nozzle on the bottom. And through the center of that very same nozzle is where the LED light comes out that does the actual cutting and engraving on this machine. Now, why that's important is because when you're either engraving or cutting, you're blasting material essentially off whatever it is that you're doing that cutting or engraving on. And the air assist pushes that material that's being ablated away either all the way down through the cut if you're cutting, and in fact actually makes the cutting action much more efficient and allows you to cut thicker material. And if you're doing engraving, same thing, that material that you're ablating away is just blown away from the sides. So 360 degrees, it's sort of blowing away from the laser head instead of bouncing back up. And what are we blowing away? Well, you can see it down here on the slats in this machine. Most of this is from wood that I've cut on this machine because there is sap in wood, and that sap kind of turns into this black tarry stuff as you're actually cutting it on the machine. Without that air assist, the same stuff that you see down here on the slats would instead be up on the lens of the laser. The air assist does a great job keeping that off the laser lens. Now, you see we actually have an indicator here, a green light for lens. There's a sensor in here that knows when the lens is too dirty, and I haven't had to clean the lens on this machine because that air assist has done such a great job, but eventually it's going to get dirty even with the air assist. Now, I've done quite a bit of cutting on this machine and it's still green, but eventually this guy will turn red, and this very easily disassembles, allowing us to get the lens off so that we can clean it and or replace it even in the future if we need to. There's also a sensor for fire in here, so if we do actually manage to start a fire inside this enclosure, this will turn red. I mean, I guess we'd probably see the fire too, but it does have a sensor for that and will stop the machine rather than keep trying to engrave and keep blowing more air into that fire. Oh, and probably obvious, but you notice we have a light here for air as well, and it's flashing red. That's because there's no air. This thing actually knows whether there is air coming into it. So if for some reason we've either forgotten to plug in our air assist or a connection has come undone, the laser actually knows that it doesn't have air blowing through it and will also stop or refuse to start. Now, this laser is sold in several different wattages. I have the 22 watt one, and I consider that to be the Goldilocks edition. And let me explain why. The way that these LED laser heads work is, like, this is 22 watts. There's not really a 22 watt laser in there. what's actually going on is there is several lower wattage laser modules, and they're optically combining those LED laser beams into a single beam. Well, the more of those modules that you combine, the wider that your overall beam becomes. And at 22 watts, again, I consider that to be like the Goldilocks size beam, because this thing does a great job cutting and it does a great job engraving. If we go any wider than the beam that this 22 watt laser head produces, it really isn't the ideal tool for engraving anymore. Yeah, you can cut thicker material, but you can't really engrave with it. I mean, you can, it'll let you do it, but it's like, you know, printing with a printer that is half the resolution of a different printer. You're always going to want to use that higher resolution printer. And in fact, if you buy the 40 watt version of this machine, they actually send it with a 1.6 watt head that you can optionally replace the 40 watt one with for engraving. Now, the thing is, though, every time you want to switch between cutting and engraving, you now have to switch the laser head. So I wouldn't suggest getting the 40 watt version unless you want to cut really thick material and that is your primary use of the machine. If you want to do both cutting and engraving, I would get the 22 watt version. I think that, again, is the Goldilocks version. So we talked a lot about the safety features and the overall engineering of this machine. One thing I didn't mention is the build volume, and that is 415 millimeters by 400 millimeters, which is quite generous, particularly for an enclosed machine. But a cool feature of this machine is, I mentioned it has that trash drawer. If I pull this drawer all the way out, the machine's actually open on the bottom. So even if we had something that was much larger that we wanted to engrave, we could still engrave a 415 by 400 millimeter area of it. We would actually just put that entire thing that we were engraving underneath the machine, or take the machine and set it on top of that larger object, which is a nice feature, again, for an enclosed machine. Okay, so taking a look at the outside of this machine, we do have a very basic set of controls on the front to move the laser head around, home it. We can frame the active design, and we do have a button that we can either start the design with if we insert an SD card in here, or pause. And this will actually pause even if we're cutting remotely from the computer as well. And you can see here on the side, we do have a slot for an SD card. I wouldn't recommend using it that way, but you can. If you need to use this in a manner, let's say you need to take this to somebody else's house to engrave on the surface of something that is impractical to bring back to your shop, you can load that design on an SD card, and you can execute that design right here from the front panel of the machine. But again, the way to use this machine is through lightburn. And we've got a power button down here. This lower cable is our power coming into the machine from the included power brick, and this top one is USB for the laser cutter engraver. And there's a second USB port on here as well, right up here on the side for the USB camera. And that camera is actually up here on the crossbar that runs across horizontally on the machine. And in fact, you can kind of see it sticking down here a little bit. And that's one gripe I do have with this machine. They should have just included a right angle cable. This is one that I added. I picked this one up. I'll include a link to this one in the description of the video. It was like $5 or $6 or something. It wasn't expensive, but it would have just been nice if they included one. It's silly to me to have a normal USB-C cable coming all the way out off the side of this machine. To me, it's just like a ticking time bomb of how long is it going to be till you knock into that thing and break it off? And then does the cable break, or did you break the connector? I wish they had just included a right angle cable, but it's cheap to add it. One of the challenge I had with this machine is that USB connectivity. There's nothing wrong with it. It works fine, but it's just the fact that it is USB connectivity versus network connectivity. I don't think they necessarily could have executed it any differently and had the integrated functionality in this machine for lightburn. But the problem that I faced is this machine is over here in the corner of my basement where it made sense for me to route my fume extraction, but it's like 30-40 feet away from where my desktop is that I operate all my 3D printers from and everything down here in this space. So what I've done is I added a USB 2.0 extender that works over just regular Cat5e Ethernet cable. Now, it's not actually network. You don't plug this into a network switch. This does need to be a home run all the way to the other box that looks just like this one that plugs into the computer. So both of these are connected to the printer here. This one is the camera, this one is the laser engraver itself, and in fact there's even 2 more USB ports here. And it sends those USB signals over this Cat5e Ethernet cable to a box on the other end that has just a single USB port that gets connected right to the back of the computer. And it makes it seem as if this thing is directly connected to your computer, like it's sitting right next to it, even though it might be up to, in this case, up to 60 meters away. And I'll link this specific extender that I picked up because I know for a fact that it works well with this machine. And in fact, it works really well. I can turn this guy off and turn it back on, and I can hear the sound that Windows makes that this has been reconnected within about half a second. All right, speaking of that connectivity, let's actually go take a look at how this machine shows up in Lightburn and how we use it. Okay, so here we are in Lightburn, and I want to show you how this machine integrates into Lightburn, because that's not something that I originally understood. I anticipated that you would use this machine through its interface in the front, the same as other machines that I have used, and that's not the case at all. It's really designed to be tightly integrated with Lightburn and used directly within Lightburn. And as you can already see here on the screen, I can see inside the machine. This is a piece of basswood plywood that I've placed in the machine, and if I hit this update overlay, if I had moved this piece around or if I had set something else up on top here, it would update that still image and show me exactly the position of anything that I've placed on the bed. And in fact, this view over here is actually live. If I hit home, it's going to go ahead and home this machine. So when you're doing cutting and engraving, you can actually monitor that job through the window over here on the side as well. But having this overlay in the interface is really, really cool. One of the challenges I faced with the open frame machine that I used in the past was if you wanted to engrave something small, like text on something small, you just kind of do your best. What I had done is I'd gone in here into start from, and I set it to current position, and then I set the job origin to the middle. And I'd always just try and position the laser head directly over the center of the material that I wanted to engrave, or the center of the position that I wanted the overall engraving to be. And I got it right, probably 8 out of 10 times. There was numerous things where I just had to put another piece of material in and start over because I was too far away from the center, or I was a little off the edge, or it wasn't exactly where I wanted it to be. Now, fortunately, those were inexpensive pieces of material that I had plenty of, so it wasn't a big deal. But if you're engraving on something that you only have one of, or that is actually worth something, you're going to want to make sure you engrave in the right spot, and this allows you to do that. In fact, you can zoom all the way in, so we can zoom all the way in and find the actual corner of the material. Now, you do get slight distortion here at the edges. You can see, we're slightly off the grid. The closer to the center you are, the more accurate it is. So, and this is a pretty big piece of material, so you can't really tell, but if we had something rectangular or square in the center area, it would show up perfectly, and we could zoom all the way in and find the exact position that we want to be before we start that job. Speaking of starting the job, we do all that from right inside this same interface. Again, we don't ever actually have to walk over to the machine other than just to monitor what we're doing. So let's say I wanted to, I don't know, maybe engrave a square here and a circle over here and one of these down here. First of all, again, I can position these anywhere. Oops, let me switch back over to my move tool. So I can position these anywhere I want. So let's say I wanted this guy sort of up close to the edge of the material, and I wanted this inside here, and then maybe, I don't know, we'll shrink this guy down. We'll fit him in there as well. So I guess really in this case, we're cutting out this shape, and then we're cutting out an oval shape with sort of a hex cut out from the center, and then we'll cut the whole thing out in a rectangle. All I would need to actually do is just hit start right here, and the machine would actually start and make that cut right now. The run G-code, you can load an existing G-code file and still send it from right here, right from within Lightburn, rather than having to put it on an SD card and walk over to the machine. We can also frame the job. So here, actually, let's do that right now. So if I select all this and then we hit frame, we'll be able to see right here in the preview window, that's going to go over and it's going to outline the area that we're drawing that in. And you can see it's right up there in the corner of the material, exactly where we expected. So you know what, let's try something. So we know we have a little bit of distortion up here at the corner. Let's just see how accurate we are up at the edge. Let's take this square. Let's go ahead and actually cut this out of the material. All right, so I've got my power set. All I'm going to do now is just home the machine. If we go back over here to camera control, we'll see it home, and then I'm going to hit start. And we'll see the laser comes over, turns on, and it's going to make that cut in the material. Now we're seeing that live update over here. We're not seeing it over here because this is just a still overlay. But when this is done, what I'm thinking is we'll be able to update the overlay, and we'll see how close that actually is to where the material was cut. Okay, I moved the gantry here just with the move buttons and lightburn so that it's not blocking the light from the front of the machine, because I think if we update the overlay now, we'll see a better image. Yep, so I still can't really see. Oh, actually, yeah, you can. You can see it. So you can see a slight bit of distortion, a little bit of like a parallelogram here, where maybe, I don't know, what's that? So that's 290, 295. So we're maybe at most 1.5, 2 millimeters off on the position of our cut based on what we're seeing through the camera. But that's at the extreme end. I mean, this is I think a 16-inch wide piece of material. So we're getting close to the limits of this machine. If we were closer to the center, that would be exactly dead on. But if I delete this, you can see that's our actual cut. I mean, that is pretty darn accurate, particularly for being at the edge of a piece of material like that. All right, so how's the actual quality of cutting and engraving on this machine? Well, no surprise, for being a flagship model from Creality, it's really good. And here's two good examples. I made both of these for my wife shortly after I got the machine, so I didn't even have a ton of experience with lightburn or using the machine. In fact, I think this might have been the very first thing that I cut on the machine. And this is probably the third thing that I made on the machine. Let's take a look at this first. So this is engraved, and I just grabbed this photo off the internet and brought it into lightburn and used the image tools in lightburn to generate the engraving paths for this. And I don't know how close I can get to this without losing focus, but the detail on this is really good. And in fact, there's not a ton of contrast in this image. There's like a solar system sort of space scene behind the TARDIS. Same thing kind of over here, and it just sort of blends in really nice with the wood grain that's already on this piece of material. But the areas where there is contrast just came up just super clean, and you can actually feel it as well, because the areas that are lighter colored haven't been touched at all, and the darker the area is, the deeper into the wood that it is cut. This just looks really cool in person. I don't know if the camera's probably just not doing it justice. In fact, when I gave this to her, she set it on the windowsill over our kitchen sink, and that is where it's lived for weeks because it just looks cool. So this is cut out of the same material. I think this is 3mm basswood plywood, and it's just super, super clean. I wanted to show you this because it has so many straight edges and corners in it, and all of them are dead on perfect. There's nowhere where there was like backlash or slack in anything where it got off track. It's just dead perfect. And look how thin this is here. I mean, that can't be more than 1 millimeter thick, and it's still perfectly square and perfectly aligned. The detail that this cuts with is just really, really nice. All right, those of you that are not new to the channel already probably know that my interests lie more on the engineering and functional side of making versus the cute trinket side. I mean, hey, I make my fair share of cute trinkets for friends and family as well, but me personally, my interests lie more in the, what useful things can I do with it? So let's try some of that. So this material is 1.5mm thick, adhesive-backed natural cork, and I'd like to be able to cut this stuff to very specific shapes to use on the back or the bottom of some of the 3D printed stuff that I do. And in fact, I have an idea for something I'd like to use this for. Recently on the channel, I made this organizer / holder for all of the tool holders for my lathe, and it works really well, but as I drop them down in there, they just kind of slam into the bottom, and it's probably not doing it any harm, but I thought, gee, it'd be neat if I could have a piece of cork underneath each one of these that was precision cut to fit inside these spaces. So let's try getting that cork on the laser cutter and see if we can cut that shape on that machine. Okay, I went ahead and pulled the slats out of the machine and put my honeycomb in for this cut. And it is nice that you can fit a standard honeycomb in there for cuts like this, because the cork comes on a roll, and any material that you're trying to cut that comes on a roll, it doesn't really want to lay flat. And being able to put it on the honeycomb and clip it in from the sides really helps hold it in place so you can make that cut. Yeah, that cut really nice, actually, and cut through the backing material very cleanly as well. I mean, yeah, there's some charring on the edges, like any material that you're going to cut that does burn. but none of that is visible from the top of the piece. And this looks like a really, really accurate cut. So I exported the DXF from the bottom face of the 3D printed design, and then I brought the size down by about a 0.5 millimeter all the way around the perimeter. So this should fit right in. Let's try it. Oh yeah, that is perfect. Now, could I have traced that onto the cork and cut it out by hand? Yeah, probably. And honestly, it wouldn't be terrible if I only had to do one. Wouldn't be this clean. But I tell you what, I sure wouldn't want to make that many of them by hand. All right, a while back, I did a gasket for a cover plate on a diesel engine out of 3D printed, out of TPU. And it's held up okay so far. There is oil seeping out in a couple different places, and folks did warn me in the comments that over time, as that thing gets really hot, I may have some issues with that TPU gasket, particularly in that use, just because that engine gets so hot. A while ago, I picked up this roll of gasket making material. This is by Felpro. To make a gasket for that, but this stuff is notoriously hard to cut. It's a pain to work with. It's a thick, like fibrous filled fiberboard, I guess is what you would call it. So I just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. And I got to thinking, I wonder if we could cut this on the laser cutter. I still have the design from when I 3D printed that, so I'm going to go export that as a DXF, and let's see if we can cut ourselves a custom gasket out of this material. All right, pretty much same story as the cork. This cut no problem at all, and really cleanly as well. I mean, you can see just how sharp all of the cuts are on both of our bolt holes here, as well as all of our edges. And this is, again, this is not an easy material to cut. This is like a compressed fiber board. And this is probably also not something you'd want to cut without an enclosure and fume extraction, as I'm sure the stuff that's in here is not something that you should be breathing if you are burning it. But yeah, that was really easy. Let's try something harder. All right, I've got a bunch of planks of wood, just like this one. They actually came off of, well, I cut them apart from the crate that my lathe came in. And it's some sort of mystery hardwood. I don't know what it is. It is very dense and heavy, and it's about 1/2 inch thick or 12 millimeters thick. I don't expect the machine to cut this, but I want to try it and see what happens. I have like a huge pile of this stuff that I was going to burn in my outdoor fireplace, but if I can make use of it in some fashion with the laser cutter, I'd like to do that. So let's go set up a piece of this in the laser and just try and cut like a circle out of it at full power and see what happens. All right, I genuinely did not expect the machine to cut through this. This is really thick, dense material. Yeah, let's go see if we can do something other than just like cutting an oval out of that material. In fact, I'm going to do a material test so we know how much power it actually takes to cut through this, because maybe I'm using more power than I need to. And let's cut something more intricate out. All right, guys, I really did not expect that. I mean, I didn't even expect to get this test cut out of material that thick, but it cut through this no problem. And this was not even at full power. I think I wound up doing this at 100 millimeters per minute at about 90% power. So we were close to needing full power, but we didn't quite need full power. So we could probably cut a little bit thicker than this in one pass. This is done in one pass, just like this piece. But thicker than this, we probably would need to make 2 passes on the material. But look how clean this came out. And what's particularly impressive, the first thing I looked at when I took it off is, because this is such a thick cut, so the laser itself, the focus of the beam is not going to be the same up on this surface as it is when it comes out of the bottom surface. But look how square all of those are. Look how even the cuts are in the teeth. I can't even tell which side of this was the top and which side was the bottom anymore, because all the cuts are still parallel and square. Like I was expecting to see these, kind of coming off at an angle, really clean on one side, but the other side just looking kind of like a blown out, uneven mess. But nope. Yeah, both sides. Really impressed. I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but I feel like I don't want to throw it out. It's just kind of cool. All right, there's one more thing I want to try. Behind my lathe is a piece that I prototyped with 3D printing a couple of weeks ago. This is a plate that carries the motion of the carriage down to the reed head for the DRO. And this is cut out of aluminum. Obviously I didn't 3D print the aluminum, but I did, before I went and machined this piece out of 1/4 inch thick aluminum, I prototyped it first with 3D printing. So I made this exact same piece and 3D printed it and went through, I think, 4 different versions until I had an exact fit for all of my bolt holes, as well as the right length down here to attach to this reed head. Now this piece 3D printed took about an hour to print. So each time I went through an iteration, I waited for an hour for this to come out, for me to be able to come down here and test it on the lathe. Well, I bet we can do prototype work like this a lot faster on a laser cutter than we can with 3D printing. So I'm going to export the design of this in DXF and try and cut this same exact piece out of plywood, and let's see how it comes out. All right, well, surprise, surprise, that came out perfect on the first try. And I mean, I'm not particularly surprised. I've cut a bunch of stuff out of this basswood plywood at this point. It just never occurred to me to use it for prototyping, much like I have 3D printing in the past. And the advantage is this cut in about a minute, minute and a half tops. The 3D printed part was taking an hour. And I mean, it's not like an hour is a tremendously long amount of time either. And I'm still happy to be able to use that process for prototyping before I go and make it out of an expensive piece of aluminum. But man, this is even better. A minute and a half, I could have iterated this in less than an hour versus an entire afternoon that it took me to iterate that piece with 3D printing. All right, so I've showed you everything that this machine can do, and we're still barely scratching the surface, but would I recommend this machine? And the answer shouldn't really be a surprise. It is yes, I would recommend this machine. Unless you want to get an open frame machine and take it outside every time you want to use it, every time you want to cut something, every time you want to prototype, absolutely. Get yourself an enclosed machine, and I would specifically recommend this one because I have been super happy with it. It has done everything that I have asked of it, and I haven't had to fiddle with it at all. I'm the type of person, I like to put the time in up front and get something to work very well. I don't want to fiddle with it. I just want to walk up and use it. I like making things, I like fixing things, I like solving problems. I don't like playing with things. I don't want to go mod and spend a bunch of time trying to make something work the way that it should work out of the box, and this does that very well. It just works. Every time I have something I need to do with it, I walk up to the machine, I program it to do what I want, and it just works. The pieces just come out exactly the way I intended it, and I like that. Let's talk about the pros and cons. Pros, easy. Hands down, number one, it's enclosed, and specifically I have mine set up to ventilation that actually routes outside my house. I would recommend that you do the same. If for whatever reason it's impractical for you to route that ventilation outside of your house or outside of your maker space or wherever you're using it, Creality does offer a standalone unit that you can run that tubing into that goes through, I think, several layers of filters and activated charcoal. I haven't tested that. I don't know how well it works, but it does look like quite a heavy-duty, industrial unit. I would recommend that as opposed to, just going through a standard HEPA filter, and or worst case scenario, do not exhaust it directly into your room. Even if you're cutting just wood, yeah, the novelty of your room smelling like a campfire is going to wear out after about an hour. The camera integration is really well done and is super nice. You do have to calibrate it. I didn't talk a lot about that with setting up the machine. It takes about 10 minutes to do. It's a whole bunch of moving like a calibration card around the different areas inside the enclosure. You do that once. Once it's done, you can trust that wherever you position your material inside the machine, and when you view it on the overlay, that's exactly where your cut is going to be. That 415 by 400 millimeter work area is very generous and nice, again, specifically for an enclosed machine. A lot of the other enclosed machines have much smaller work areas. If you're cutting really tiny things like, like this or even this, that's probably fine. But if you want to do bigger stuff because you're prototyping or larger engravings, you're gonna really appreciate that larger work area. The trash drawer at the bottom of the machine is also very well thought out. I love that you can pull the whole drawer out and just dump it out. Again, in my experience, it's easier just to pull the shop back over, but I still pull the drawer out. Trying to vacuum from inside the opening through the slats or through your honeycomb, that's a real pain in the butt. But pulling the whole drawer out and just vacuuming all the bits up, or you can even scoop them up with probably like a dustpan, way better than the alternative. Okay, cons, and I do have a couple of them. So the first one I already talked about. It's where that USB cable comes out of the side for the camera. I don't know why they did that. I mean, it makes sense to have the USB port there, but why not include a right angle cable? It looks completely silly having a normal USB-C cable coming out of the side and sticking out like 2 or 3 inches and then routing like in the air to someplace else. Pick yourself up a right angle cable for that camera if you do get one of these machines. Next is one that I didn't mention. As much as I like those slats in the machine and how convertible they are, there is space in those slots for them to rattle around. And when you're cutting material, it's not an issue. But when you're engraving very small, intricate designs and the machine moves quickly, what happens is the whole chassis shakes around and those slats rattle around and the material itself moves relative to the laser head. So you're not really engraving in the exact spot that you think you are because the material is rattling around. Maybe it's only a couple of thou. It's not like it's a huge distance, but it's enough that the machine isn't engraving exactly where it thinks it's engraving. It's engraving a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. I think there's an easy fix for that, and in fact, I'll probably tackle that with a functional print in the future. So it's not something that would keep me from buying the machine, but it is something that you will probably want to address if you do a lot of intricate, detailed engraving. The last con isn't really a con as much as it is a potential future concern, and I'm reaching a little bit with this one, but I do just want to mention it. As much as I love the enclosure made from that flexible material, I can see in the future that material getting gunked up with smoke and other debris that are coming off of what you're cutting and or even just rubbing on itself as you open and close that lid. And I would like to see Creality offer those pieces for sale individually. I can see after using that machine for a few years, it would be nice to be able to just purchase another set of those translucent protective panels and just swap all of them out with brand new. I don't presently see that offered as an accessory. Now this machine has launched pretty recently, so hopefully they'll offer that in the future, and I did offer that back to the marketing person that I'm connected with at Creality, so that hopefully they do offer that in the future. So I think this is a great machine for both seasoned makers and beginners. Yeah, it does cost a bit more than an entry-level open frame machine that a beginner is going to be tempted to buy, but you don't realize how important that enclosure and ability to ventilate the inside of the enclosure is until you actually start using the machine day after day. Much like if you get into 3D printing and you buy a really low-end machine without realizing how nice it is to have something like a flexible PEI bed sheet or auto bed leveling. Those are just things that you might not realize you really need up front, but as you start using the machine, you really wish you spent a few more dollars and just picked those up to begin with. So guys, thanks for hanging out with me for this review video. This is not the typical type of content that I do on this channel. This channel is mostly functional 3D printing. So using 3D printing to solve actual engineering problems or add functionality to something, or often just create functionality with completely clean sheet design. If you're into that sort of thing, check out some of my other videos. I publish a new functional printing video every single Friday. If you like what you see, hit that subscribe button. And guys, if you do, I'll see you next Friday.